start-finish line again.
All right, thank you guys for joining us again today. J.R. Patton here with Motorsports in New Mexico. We're coming to you from Bob Duffey's museum that he has here. We finally were able to get our show together with him after much scheduling conflicts, everything like that. We've been talking about it, and we're finally able to make it happen now. So I'm not going to take much time to go over a lot of stuff in this show because I know it's going to be a long show talking about all his stuntman stuff that he's done over the years from decades. That I've heard more stories today about it, and I wish we could put them all in one deal, but then our show would be 2 days long. So we're going to try to limit it to about 15-20 minutes, but there are some cool stories, so I hope you all stay tuned, watch the entire episode, and get to know some of the cool stuff that's gone on. So first of all, let me introduce Bob Duffey here. Bob, say hi.
Hello, everybody.
And for those that don't know, Bob is a stuntman from... he started back doing stuff way back in when?
1972.
1972.
Before you were born?
Only about 11 years. So, but he's got some cool records, and we're going to go into a couple stories with him on some of these different records and different stories that he has as far as, the World Jumping Championship. He is the fastest man in a quarter mile with a world record backwards on a motorcycle. Not forwards, but backwards. And I believe it was at 122 miles an hour,
yes.
At 11 point.
And it doesn't have reverse.
Yeah, this is him the motorcycle going forward, but Bob's sitting backwards. So,
yeah.
And then he's done, this was the first man to jump a helicopter with the actual blades spinning. So, I mean, there was people that have jumped them before, I'm sure.
No.
But not, you're the first one to jump a helicopter, period, plus when it was spinning.
Yeah, if it wasn't running, why?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's pretty awesome there, as well as a mechanical failure that turned into probably one of his most famous jumps that I know about personally, that I've heard the story on, as well as his purple van that he's been telling us is more famous than him. So first of all, let's get into what got you started in riding. What made you want to start being the stuntman that you were?
Well, first on the riding part, I'm going to give my dad credit because he was riding motorcycles long before I was around, and so he's the one that got me started. And the stunt show business came up from a friend of mine that I was racing. We didn't really race in the same class, but we both raced at Manzanita Speedway over in Phoenix, and he wanted to start a motorcycle jumping team. I thought he was nuts, but when he said, you don't have to pay anything, you get a free motorcycle, leathers, helmets, gloves, boots, show up and you get paid to ride. What, really? You're going to pay me to ride? That sounds like a good idea to me.
Well, I wouldn't have blamed you then either. So that's what got you started, and that's where Bob, the stuntman Duffey, came in. And so tell us a little bit. First of all, I know. To me, the most famous story I've heard is the quarter mile deal. But you've told me a couple times today. But that's not my greatest accomplishment. So what you consider your World Jumping Championship your greatest accomplishment, correct?
Well, I do. Nobody else does, like you said. But that was on CBS Sports Spectacular, October of 1977. Yeah, I know that's before some of you, but 7 of the top jumpers from all over the world. England, France, and Czechoslovakia was represented. Then it was three jumps. You were scored just like Olympics, and so you had to score high by landing on a target, and we started at 20 cars. Second jump was at 22 cars. Then you had an option jump to go again at 22 cars, but you had to throw out one of your scores. Well, obviously you're going to throw out the low score, but if your option jump was lower, you got that score. You can't go back and take the other one. And then you got a bonus jump after winning the championship to go for another world record, which was even further, for $5,000. But I have a $20,000 check on the wall to prove that I won it.
The International Motorcycle Jump-Off. It's 7
of the world's finest motorcycle jumpers from England, Czechoslovakia, France, and the United States, trying to make it across this great divide for $50,000, $20,000 for first place, and a $5,000 bonus if someone cares to go the ultimate distance here in this program. Ready now for Bob Duffey, alternate. Then in thrill shows out of those ranks. Good jump by Bob Duffey. Bob Duffey brings it under control on his 400cc bike. Score about a 7.8, they tell us. Well, Bob Duffey looked like a very good jump, maybe a little long in the tooth when you came down on this receiving ramp.
Yeah, when you ride with the front wheel high, which feels much better to me on the landing, it's hard to judge where you're landing at, but I'm sure it was a little bit long, but felt great. I love it.
And once again, here's Bob Duffey's leap, and you can see he drops that rear wheel and overshoots the target, but still comes up with a ready to go. Graduate of Motorsports, hardest school, the thrill shows. The old 2-a-day, 7 days a week on tracks that are graded rough and rougher. What about jumping at night, Bob Duffey?
I used to do a lot of racing at night, and shadows have a tendency to bother you. You think there's somebody behind you or somebody moving, and it had a tendency to you just got to make sure your concentration's strictly on what you're doing and not watch anything but that ramp.
All right, here he is focusing on that ramp. Bob Duffey, New Mexico campaigner, 7 years in thrill show business. Whoa, way back, almost off the back of his bike. He kept it gathered up. Remember, he has to stay on the bike all the way across, 10 feet down.
Let's go to Tim Clarence, CBS, and find out what Bob Duffey thought about that run.
Good score. Bob Duffey looked like a close moment at the finish of that one.
Not from where I was at, it felt great.
It really felt great. It looked like it was really back on the rear wheel.
I know it. You know, I don't know. That's the way it come up, and those kind feel more exciting to me, and that's what I'm in it for.
Well, it sure looked exciting. Bob Duffey's run at 110 feet. A 9.6, collecting a big score and a small scare. Duffey.
Now, we also mentioned the quarter mile backwards. So, and I've seen you at our bike night, stuff like that. And I would almost say you're probably the fastest guy backwards in a quarter mile, but I bet you could probably ride the slowest backwards in a quarter mile as well. I've seen you win plenty of our slow races at our bike nights and stuff like that.
You know, I was always proud of, because I liked all forms of motorcycle competition. And I like trials where they go slow and don't put your foot down and maneuver around obstacles that are phenomenal. But at a very young age, I got involved in a club that was here in town called the Chaparral Motorcycle Club. And they had a slow race then. I was 14. And this little red Ducati over here is what I got to ride that belonged to a dealer. He said, why don't you ride this? Okay. And I still have the trophy where I got second. I was 14 years old. So I always liked, anybody can turn the throttle on and go fast. It takes a much better rider to go slow with the balance and expertise.
So when you did the quarter mile backwards, that is a Guinness World Record, correct?
Yes.
And it still stands to
Yes, you
this
can look
day.
it up.
It still stands to this day.
That was done at Green Valley Raceway in Dallas, and the owner of the track at that time was Bill Helsher. And after I ran that, he hired me to do a show down there with the wheelies and riding backwards and a jump and all that. So I have a copy, actually the original, but I have a blown up copy of that ET in Dallas at 11.71 seconds, 11.71 seconds at 122 miles an hour. And actually, it was a little odd because as you're going fast down the track backwards, the starting line is going away from you, and the further you get to the other end, the slower the starting line goes away from you, and it doesn't seem very fast. And I kept telling myself, where's the quarter mile? It should be here just any second, hello. And then when I get back there, it's the fastest I ever turned.
Now, what made you decide? I mean, we see everybody go straight, but what made you decide to do it backwards?
Well,
That's kind of what you're known for. You're kind of known for backwards.
I
mean, everything that you see on all your pictures that we've seen, you're backwards more than you're forwards, I think.
Well, of course, growing up here in Las Cruces, where I live, my parents moved here when I was 2 years old. It was all desert. The first street down here was the city limits. We lived out of the city limits, so it's really grown a lot. So I rode a bicycle all over everywhere. When I was 14 years old, I learned to ride a unicycle, and so that just developed into everything else to do with balance. And I rode a bicycle backwards, so it would naturally progress into motorcycles. And the first motorcycle I ever rode backwards was a little Honda 65 down at the Topper Drive-In. That goes way back. And the friend let me ride it, and I rode it around the restaurant, stopped, it was a drive-in, turned around on it backwards and came back around riding it backwards. He wasn't too pleased about that, but I went, everybody liked it. But the quarter mile thing just naturally progressed into when I would do quarter mile drag strip shows and to add a little something extra that nobody else was doing. And it was hard to get used to the speed to start off with on motorcycles, because even when you're paddling hard on a bicycle backwards, it's slow. So idling on the motorcycle seemed a little fast, and I got better and better at it.
Now, when you did this, was your bike set up to ride backwards, or was it still standard, the shifter still facing the front? Basically, it was the same, a stock bike, just you riding backwards.
Well, the one right behind us is the one I did it on. A 1979 limited production Kawasaki Z1R Turbo 1000. And they only produced about 200 of them. One was on eBay last summer and sold for $37,800. So it's worth a small fortune.
And what did that bike go for brand new?
Retail was $5,000. That is what I gave for it. But yeah, it was $5,000 brand new. But as my dad always told me, if it's not for sale, it's not worth anything. And it's not for sale.
I wouldn't blame you. That is a cool bike. We'll add
Motorcycle.
some photos. Sorry, motorcycle. He's got me on that a couple times today. The bike, motorcycle. That is a cool motorcycle, and we'll have a little bit more on that.
That's a long story.
We've got some pictures, and then I know I was talking to Brian, one of our parts managers today, and he says, the bad part is he runs a faster quarter mile time backwards than I do going forward. So that is a serious feat, and
it is a bit cheating with a Turbo 1000 cow.
Yeah, but nonetheless, it's backwards.
Yep.
So
I've done a lot of things backwards.
And then, like we said, then we were talking about the helicopter. The first person jumped the helicopter with it, the blade spinning. Well, the first person to jump a helicopter, period, plus
the
running helicopter. And what kind of bike did you do that on?
Actually, I did it on a 400 Mako, 1974 model. And it was done, I believe, June 14th of 1974. And I did it right here at Las Cruces. Out then, it was called Sertoma Speedway. Now it's Southern New Mexico Speedway. But that was all put together in a matter of 2 weeks. And now, if you see somebody jumping a helicopter, it's not a real helicopter. FAA says absolutely not. Their rules say you're not going to endanger anybody with hitting a helicopter because it looks like a fish out of water. It flops everywhere. It could hurt a lot of people. And it was a bit on the extreme side then. They didn't even have extreme sports. But I wanted to come up with something different to jump nobody had done that gets people's attention. And when you come up with something and the people go, oh, that's nice, that ain't going to work. They have to think you're absolutely crazy. And a running helicopter was the first thing I came up with.
That's what I was going to tell everybody. Now when they do any of these stunts that everybody gets to see, these big, Robbie Madison doing the wave on the motorcycle, all these big jumps that all these guys have done now, they're so calculated, precise, planned out. They've had production teams that plan these things out for months and months.
Or years.
How long did it take you to decide that you were going to jump a running helicopter?
Well, by the time I thought of it, it was probably actually 2 days before I presented it to Sertoma Club here in town. And I have a really good friend, had a fence company right down here below me on Solano. He was in the Sertoma, and I mentioned it to him, and he said, let's go promote it to him. So we went to a meeting, and as usual, some laughed, others thought I was crazy, but we were serious. I already had the helicopter lined up. And like I say, by the time I said, this is what I want to do at your speedway, and they said okay, and we did the show. It was 2 weeks, but
not
you
2
know.
weeks of planning. That was just 2 weeks of you scheduling and getting it scheduled, not 2 weeks of them mapping out
no.
all the wind, making sure everything's right. You just said, let's just go for it.
Well, I found out a long time later that the helicopter company was really thinking about backing out when I first presented it to them. Because when I went to Sertoma, I wanted to make sure I'm ready, and if they say yes, we're going for it. And after I showed them a flyer that we already had putting out around town of jumping the helicopter, he said, well, I was thinking about backing out, but I guess I can't now. And of course, it all came out fine. Short story with that, and as you know, I don't have short stories, but they bought insurance for that night show at the racetrack. Well, they had a bad crash with Ivan Kaufman, not a crash. They set his car on fire by throwing gas on the engine. They thought it was water. Big mistake, and of course, it took hours to get the ambulance back. And by the time I came in with the helicopter, got set up, and did the jump, it was after midnight. Their insurance had already expired.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well,
But
obviously it worked out well for you. I mean,
I don't,